I'm Taylor Riggs. This is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all of our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, talks resume. High-level negotiations between Washington and Beijing begin again this week. We'll dig into the issues of intellectual property and U.S. companies that do business in China. Plus, Zuckerberg to testify. The Facebook CEO will appear before lawmakers this month on the social network's controversial cryptocurrency. We have details. And whistleblower speaks. One of the people at the center of the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal joins me to discuss technology in a voter profiling age. Christopher Wiley on the risks ahead of the 2020 election. High-level trade talks picked up this week in Washington after tapering off in July with no clear breakthroughs. China's vice premier was greeted by Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer before talks resumed Thursday. The stakes between the U.S. and Beijing were extremely high as President Donald Trump threatened to raise tariffs on $250 billion worth of Chinese goods on October 15th if there was no progress. The technology sector paying close attention to those discussions as intellectual property is playing a prominent role in negotiations. I spoke with Eric Geiler of the Chinese subsidiary Cyprin Global. His firm helps U.S. firms protect their intellectual property in China.
Cyprin is a fairly large company in China, 1,600 people, sub $100 million in revenue, that files and protects intellectual property for clients previously have mostly been in China and is now starting to expand into the U.S. And that's what we're doing here at Cyprin Global, based out of Boston.
What kind of IP theft language do you need to see to get a deal?
Well, sort of regardless of the status of the trade talks, the importance of securing IP protection for U.S. companies that are operating in China should not get lost anywhere. And so it's U.S. companies just shouldn't be missing out on that opportunity if they're going to operate in the Chinese market. And by the way, since most things, or many things, are manufactured in China, they are in that market already.
Who's stealing whose IP?
Good question. So there's a fair amount of confusion when it comes to what are we talking about when we talk about IP theft. It really needs to be defined a bit better. We hear that routinely, and the question is, what are we talking about specifically? And we don't hear a lot of specific examples that are at all recent. I think most people, though, tend to think of IP theft as being counterfeit goods, and that's a very real problem. It exists here, it exists in China, and it's a problem for any manufacturer that's outside of China. Where we tend to be thinking about IP is in the patent world, where you're actually disclosing, when you get a patent, is getting that patent protection not just in the United States, but doing it in China, where China is fairly open to protecting their markets for anyone operating inside China by filing and protecting it with patents.
Eric, do you trust, though, those protections in Beijing, given the relationship between the U.S. and China aren't the best right now?
Well, so if we just abstract ourselves from the battle and just sort of put that aside for a moment, when you get a patent in the United States, you're telling the world how to practice your invention. In exchange for the rights to do that, you have the right to exclude others. But you only have the right to exclude others in the United States, and you've made your invention public. And anyone from anywhere in the world can look at the United States, look at your patent, see how to practice it, and then go ahead and do it. And if you're not protecting it in the country where someone's doing it, you don't have any protection. And so it's largely a situation where you want to file for protection in China, if you're going to be filing for protection at all. It's almost crazy not to be doing that if you're going to be operating anywhere in the world besides the United States.
That was Eric Geiler of the Chinese subsidiary Ciprin Global. As for companies affected by the ongoing trade war, Tile manufactures a significant portion of its product in China. This week, the company added a new sticker to its lineup of tracking devices that help customers keep tabs on keys, wallets, and the like. Tile CEO CJ Prober joined me Tuesday and suggested the company may be considering future manufacturing hubs outside China.
Because we manufacture products and we do a lot of that in China, the trade wars and the policies there are impacting us. So we are subject to tariffs. Those went into effect on September 1st. We do support the policy, but one of the challenging things for companies like ours is we didn't have a lot of notice that the tariffs were going into place. I think we had 4 weeks notice. And so while we support the policy, when you think about building product leading up the holiday, we just didn't have a chance to react.
Well, and one of the things we've heard from companies like Apple is their elasticity of a supply chain. They need 2 quarters to move manufacturing. What's your leeway? What's your leg room?
Yeah, it does take time to shift the supply chain. If you think about a business like Tile, we've started in the US, now we're a global business. We're selling in well over 40 countries. We have, our community expands kind of across the world. And when you have complexity like that, we're in 40,000 retail doors. We're growing like crazy in Japan. Last quarter in EMEA, we saw 160% growth. You need a supply chain that meets the needs of both like retail customers, distribution customers, and then we have a big direct business as well. And so selling into those direct customers. So there's a lot of complexity, and so making moves takes time.
And have you started moving manufacturing in those places?
No, we're basically viewing this as an opportunity. As I said, we support the policy. So now we're taking the chance to reshape our supply chain in a way that serves our customers best, both, again, direct customers and then retail customers.
So you talked to me about the new hardware launch, which is great. And then there's also a software component as well, because you were here a year ago.
Yes.
And you said sometimes you actually don't need the hardware because the software, it's Bluetooth enabled and it's in connected devices like a Google Home and Amazon Alexa and Apple Siri. How is that integration between hardware and software?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a few things that aren't super well known about Tile. One is that we have a community find platform. It's basically the largest lost and found network in the world. And basically if you leave your tiled item at a Starbucks, on a train, on an airplane, it gets found by the community. So we have an app mesh network of users that are helping you locate your things. The second thing is that our big focus is around embedding the Tile capability into third-party products. So we've announced about 6 or 7 different audio headset partners, and we've launched products with companies like Bose and Plantronics and Skullcandy and Sennheiser, and we're now looking at new big verticals like laptops and cameras and wearables, and anything with a Bluetooth device, and there's 30 billion of those shipping over the next 5 years, can be a Tile with just a software update.
We only have about a minute left.
Yeah.
How do you respond to some reports that Apple could be coming out with a competitor product? Do you see Apple as a colleague or a competitor? What do you do if that's the case?
Yeah, so Apple's been a great partner for Tile. The way that we think about the rumors around the competitive product is that it's really validation, right? We've been building this category for 6 years, and it basically illustrates that this is a real pain point. Of those 30 billion devices that are shipping over the next 5 years with Bluetooth, only about 4% of those will be Apple devices. So it's a big opportunity for the rest of the market.
That was Tile CEO CJ Prober. Protests in Hong Kong kicked up again this week following months of demonstrations demanding universal suffrage and the right to choose Hong Kong's leadership. The level of violence has grown in recent weeks, and police have responded with mostly tear gas and batons. Apple joins other foreign companies struggling to navigate the pro-democracy movement. Apple yanked, then reinstated, only to pull again its popular app called HK Map Live from the App Store. The app showed police activity in Hong Kong and was said to be used by protesters for demonstrations. Bloomberg's Selena Wang filled us in from Beijing.
So this is a crowdsourcing mapping app that allows users to see where protest and police activity is happening. And you have an instance here where Apple is reversing course yet again after saying it spoke to local authorities that said it was threatening public and police safety. Now, the app creators have said there is no evidence of this, and critics have scorched the company for saying that it is basically capitulating to China's demands at the expense of free speech. But to be clear, this isn't the first time Apple has made moves like this. A few years ago, it removed VPN apps from the App Store in China. More recently, it removed the Taiwan flag emoji app. Greater China is Apple's largest market after the United States. So there is a lot at stake here for the company, and it just underscores the increasing challenges when it comes to balancing political risks both at home and abroad for international companies operating in China.
And within that balance that you talk about, was this really harming police, or is this seen really as caving to Beijing?
We did hear from the Hong Kong legislator say that he was deeply disappointed in this decision, and that in his view, this is actually hurting individual passerbys, innocent passerbys, who would use this app to avoid violence. Again, the app creators are saying that there is no evidence of this being used to threaten public safety, but Apple said it did speak with local police and authorities and did an investigation showing that it was used to potentially target individual police and individuals in areas where police aren't around. I think the broader significance of this also points to what we've seen happen to other companies that have gotten caught in the fray, not just Apple. You've seen companies from Vans to Starbucks to Zara to Activision Blizzard have to toe this delicate line and really get scorched when it comes to taking a side on either side when it comes to the Hong Kong protests. I think the NBA is a really relevant example here. A single tweet has threatened the entire business of a company that in China has spent decades building their business there, and they have more than 800 million fans. And with the single tweet seeming to be sympathetic to the Hong Kong protests, you have firms from Tencent to C-Trip, the state broadcaster refusing to broadcast their games anymore, all distancing themselves and cutting ties to this company. We have seen Beijing take a very hard-line, zero-tolerance policy approach when it comes to companies seeming to meddle in what they say are internal affairs.
That was Bloomberg's Selena Wang from Beijing. And coming up, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg summoned back to Washington as lawmakers set another round of hearings on the Libra cryptocurrency this month. We'll have details. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg.
I was actually poor.
No foreplay?
Eat your bag of Lay's with a smile on your face.
If all the diseases have been taken, I'll take a tax.
Mark Zuckerberg will get a first-hand look at the growing opposition to Facebook's plans to create a cryptocurrency. We learned this week the social network CEO will testify before the House Financial Services Committee October 23rd. The hearing will examine Facebook's impact on the financial services and housing industries. For more, I spoke to Bloomberg Technology's Kurt Wagner.
Anytime the CEO testifies, I think that's a big deal. But when it's Mark Zuckerberg, it's going to be a huge deal. I was there in April of 2018 when he last testified, and it was a total zoo. It's just everyone wants to see Mark and ask him questions, and I imagine this will be the same. And I know that they had been trying to get Sheryl Sandberg. They were also talking to her. We wrote about that a couple weeks ago. Looks like they got someone even better in theory, which is her boss, Mark Zuckerberg.
What do we know about the content of the hearing?
Well, we know that this committee focuses on financial services, so Libra, the cryptocurrency Facebook is spearheading, is probably going to be a big portion of this. They also do housing stuff. You mentioned housing in the intro. Facebook has been accused of issues around its advertising business where people are discriminating or being discriminated against, for housing-related issues. And so I imagine that that will come up as well. But the thing about these hearings, as I've learned, is that once you get an executive in front of the committee, pretty much anything goes. And so with Mark Zuckerberg in particular being there, I imagine we will hear questions that span the entire gamut.
You know, I think I've asked you this before, and I continue to be perplexed. Did Facebook realize the amount of opposition that would be coming their way about cryptocurrency?
It's hard to imagine they would have foreseen this level of pushback, because if they had, I would hope that they probably would have gone out and done some of this work before announcing the currency. That being said, it is a tough chicken and egg situation, which is if they'd gone out and started having all these conversations with politicians, and inevitably it would have leaked and everyone would have said, well, what's Facebook doing? Do they even have a plan? So they took the other approach. They actually announced the plan, and now they're having the conversations and everyone's freaking out about that. So I kind of feel like it was a lose-lose for them, but at the same time, you know, did they anticipate that Mark Zuckerberg would be testifying before Congress 4 months after this was announced? I have a hard time believing that's the case.
That was Bloomberg Technology's Kurt Wagner. Facebook skeptics now have derivatives to bet on whether Libra will meet its target launch date. CoinFlex, it's a crypto futures exchange, is offering derivatives that pay out based on the likelihood Libra will be operational by the end of 2020. The initial price equates to a 30% chance of the cryptocurrency meeting that timeline. CoinFlex CEO Mark Lamb spoke to Bloomberg Monday.
We're really excited about this futures contract because it kind of gives the market a way to really price the odds of this event occurring. So it's obviously a physically delivered Libra, and you know, in the case of non-delivery by Facebook, it settles at 0, and so it kind of gives the market a way to say, well, this is pretty likely, this is unlikely, respond to news events, and also give some clarity to Facebook's and Libra's partners in this whole project.
Good morning to you, Mark. Why so bearish, though? Why so pessimistic? Why only a 30% chance of hitting the December 2020 date, which is already later than Libra had planned?
Well, ultimately, we're going to let the market decide on this one. So it's not that's the opening price, but from there on after, it's just determined by anyone who wants to make a market.
Is this garnering a lot of attention for you? I mean, are you going to get high volume when these contracts open?
No, we don't actually expect very high volumes from these contracts. We do, however, expect them to be something that people are fascinated by trading, something that ends up trading a lot in terms of number of users, and ultimately, you know, it brings interest in the exchange, and it provides a signal to the market of where Libra actually will end up being.
We have a pretty active betting market in this country, Mark. Why is it better to use your product than to just walk into a betting office and say, I'd like to put a bet on this particular outcome for this Libra product out of Facebook? I mean, they specialize in making markets in all kinds of seemingly off-the-wall stuff. So why would you not just do that? Why do you need to come out with this product at this point?
Sure. So CoinFlex is a physically delivered futures exchange. Our main products are, you know, futures on Bitcoin that are physically delivered. And if you want a physically delivered Libra at the time of expiry, that, you know, this is the place for you. If you want to make a sports bet or something like that, and if Libra gets traded on those platforms, then that's a great place to do that. But we're trying to offer futures on Libra, and that's basically what people come to us for.
That was CoinFlex CEO Mark Lamb. Coming up, he took a struggling NASDAQ and turned it around. We hear from Bob Greifeld, former chairman and CEO of the exchange, about how he did it. That's next. And later, whistleblower is the word du jour in Washington. But before Ukraine, there was Cambridge Analytica. We speak to Christopher Wiley on why he spilled the secrets of the data mining company. This is Bloomberg. When Bob Greifeld took the reins at the NASDAQ in 2003, he knew he had his work cut out for him, as did the board. The former fintech executive got off to a running start. He made key personnel changes, trimmed costs, and landed some big deals. In the process, he made NASDAQ into a very different institution. On Thursday, Greifeld spoke to Bloomberg's David Weston about his new book, Market Mover: Lessons from a Decade of Change at NASDAQ.
The most important move we made is to buy iNet because we got the best technology on the street. And a lot of the high frequency firms use some version of iNet today. So we gained market share in iNet. When I think about the 47 acquisitions we did, the only one that we had to do, independent of price, was iNet because we were at institutional risk. We were losing market share every day, we were losing money every day, and we didn't have in-house any technology on the shelf that had been proven, that I had great faith in. So that one we had to do. The rest of the acquisitions were optional, and we were really using that to take strength and build upon further strength.
So you took NASDAQ and your stock price was going on nicely, and then 2008 happened.
Yeah, that was
it put some stress on everybody, including you, to be able to, on the systems basically, to clear all the trades that were coming through. But then there were reforms afterwards, and in your book you recount a situation where Jamie Dimon, the head of JP Morgan, called you up in not altogether a friendly way.
Well, there's some four-letter words there, but I would say this. One, our systems worked well through the great credit crisis. We were hitting volumes we only saw in the lab, so that was nerve-wracking. We bent, but we didn't break. Then we had the lobbying for what the future should be, and it was a professional, disagreement in terms of how things would play out. One thing I would have to say with Jamie, we lived through some difficult times with Facebook, and to his credit, he gave me a call during some of our darkest post-Facebook days and said, Bob, you'll get through it, it'll work out, and I appreciate that.
Well, talk about that Facebook problem, because it was pretty well known, and it's treated in the book fairly directly.
Yes.
Where I think probably I would say as a non-engineer, your engineers sort of got ahead of you.
Yeah, I see it's a really big loop. So I came there and we had a certain culture, we changed it, and we made the engineers really the king of the ship. And the organization was not balanced. So I did my self-reflection. I said it was my issue because I created a culture where the engineers could overdevelop systems without any check from the people running the businesses. So we had to basically evolve. We learned from it. We became a more balanced organization and a better organization.
So, Bob, right now there's a big dispute, contest, discussion going on about IPOs, which were terribly important to you at NASDAQ, as opposed to direct listings. But NASDAQ, as I understand it, sort of had both experiences. Didn't you start out with a direct listing before you got there?
We did it when I was there, actually.
Oh, when you were there?
Yeah, we were...
so what's the pluses and minuses of direct listing versus IPO?
Well, I think the direct listing will have a niche. It's not going to go away, but it's not going to take over the market, right? So if you have zero need for capital, you have a brand in the investment community, then direct listing comes into frame and you have to make your decision. The advantage of the direct listing then is you don't have to get involved with what is the right price, right? So if I'm a company, I come public, the stock is up 40% or down 40%, I'm the CEO of the board. I don't really want to be in that game of trying to decide how to play that. I'd rather just get the right price. So if you list first and then raise capital a year later, right, then you'll know the price because the stock is trading. So that's an attractive alternative to some, but not to many, I would say.
That was former NASDAQ CEO Bob Greifeld. Coming up, Cambridge Analytica whistleblower Christopher Wiley has a new book out. We'll talk about data mining and potential hacking threats as the 2020 presidential election closes in. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Taylor Riggs. Facebook is appealing a ruling that says its users can sue the social network over the Cambridge Analytica data scandal. Facebook says the court's decision doesn't line up with verdicts by other courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court. The plaintiffs are arguing that Facebook improperly shared their data with third parties without their permission. More than 80 million user accounts were involved in that scandal. Now, who better to talk about Cambridge Analytica than the man who blew the whistle on the company? It's Christopher Wiley. He's also the author of a new book that details the whole series of events. He joined us Wednesday from New York, along with Bloomberg Businessweek columnist Max Chafkin.
Writing a book actually helped me really reflect on everything that happened. I talk about my journey from getting recruited at a military contractor to, working on modeling and data work that helps identify people who are more prone to paranoid ideation and extremism with the idea of trying to mitigate that problem, to having that work completely inverted after an alt-right billionaire and Steve Bannon acquired our company, to in effect do the same thing in America, targeting people who are more prone to radicalization, but in this case for the alt-right.
Christopher, coming forward the way you did, blowing the whistle on Facebook, which, as we said on this program many times, it's an incredibly powerful media company, maybe the most powerful media company in history. Yeah. What was that like? I mean, did you get any pushback from Facebook, any threats? And as you've sort of moved to publish the book and tell the story in full, have you heard from them at all?
Oh, girl, where do I begin? Before the story even emerged, I'd been working with law enforcement and regulatory agencies for months and months and months before the actual story broke. When Facebook found out that this story was emerging, something that they knew about Cambridge Analytica, well before any of this was published. The first thing that they do is threaten the journalists of The Guardian with, in my view, a spurious libel accusation. It turned out that everything was true. And in my case, they went and banned me. They banned me off of Facebook, and they also banned me for some reason off of Instagram. And then after that point, working, day in and day out with regulatory authorities in the EU, in the UK, in the United States, all over the world, one of the things that I really saw is just like the power that this company has to hide, to obfuscate their work, and things that, one of the things that I came to sort of understand is that, when you go and you blow the whistle, you see something that's wrong, and you report that to an authority. You think that there's going to be like some guy somewhere in some federal agency building that knows what to do. And one of the things that I realized is that there isn't that guy. That guy doesn't exist. I've talked to governments, I've talked to regulators, I've talked to Congress, I've talked to parliaments. People do not know how to handle this problem. And for me, the real concern is that we have a completely unregulated digital landscape that companies like Facebook take advantage of. And even though companies like Cambridge Analytica now have dissolved and no longer exist, the capabilities are still there. And one of the reasons why I wrote the book was so that, to serve as a warning, because even if this company no longer exists, what happens if China becomes the next Cambridge Analytica? What happens if North Korea becomes the next Cambridge Analytica? And currently, there are no rules. We are entrusting our democratic process to a private company, and I question whether that's a good idea.
Well, Christopher, you mentioned that you're in conversations with lawmakers and other regulators, and I wonder if you think that the current regulation and current lawmakers are doing a good enough job handling the problem as you described.
Well, I think that one of the things going to Congress I realized was the power of lobbyists, particularly the power of lobbyists to define narratives. One of the first questions that I would always get at Congress is, can the law ever keep up with technology? And I would say, well, we regulate nuclear power plants, we regulate airplanes, we regulate, medicine safety standards. There's all kinds of technologies that we regulate in the name of consumer safety. Just because something uses software or is on the internet doesn't mean that we can't create rules that require companies to consider whether the products that they're putting out into the public will be safe for people to use. The United States is one of the only OECD countries, I think the only OECD country, that doesn't have a national level privacy law. When you look at the language and the way that a lot of Silicon Valley companies talk about themselves, they say we're a service, there's opt-in, there's terms and conditions, all this stuff. Yet when you look at the types of people who work at the company, right, they're called an engineer, they're called an architect, right? They build ecosystems and environments. These are things that people are going into. These are architectures. And when you look at how we regulate physical architecture or engineering, right, where if you built a building, if you were an architect and you built a building without fire exits, and you said, well, it's okay because like people agreed, they opted into my building, they walked in and there was like a book of terms and conditions over there, and if it burns down, well, that was their choice. People wouldn't stand for that. And so I think that one of the things that I hope people, particularly lawmakers, if they read the book, one of the takeaways is we need to really understand what is social media. What are these platforms? And they're architectures, and they need safety standards.
So, we've got obviously 2020 elections coming up. The data that was at issue, with the Cambridge Analytica scandal that we've been talking about for years, is that data still around? And do we, is it possible or conceivable that it could actually come into play again, 4 years later? And I guess in a larger sense, how worried should we be about foreign interference, going forward?
I don't know. I don't know what happens with that information. I don't know what happened with that data. A lot of the same people who were working at Cambridge Analytica now work on the Trump campaign. This is a company that had regular contact with Russian officials. The CEO shared vodka with the Russian ambassador. You had its clients, regularly meeting with the Russian ambassador during 2016, and also then going and meeting with the Trump campaign. So the people exist, the capabilities exist. Whether or not the data still exists, I don't know. Facebook presumably has tried to contain the problem. When I dealt with them, they didn't really do much. But that's exactly why I think we do need to take a step back and go, should there be some kind of consumer safety watchdog when it comes to digital platforms? Because if no one's watching, these are the things that can happen. And in this case, we had people come forward and talk to the media, but what about the cases where that doesn't happen?
That was Cambridge Analytica whistleblower Christopher Wiley and Bloomberg Businessweek's Max Chafkin. And coming up, Roku stock surged after an analyst predicts the connected TV company will triple its user base by 2022. We'll hear from that analyst, Tim Nolan of Macquarie, next. And later, consolidation in the food delivery business. We'll hear from the Delivery Hero CEO. The company is a major player in Europe. This is Bloomberg. Roku had its best day in about 2 months Wednesday after Macquarie Research upgraded the stock. It's the first such move by an analyst since a sharp recent decline in the shares of the video streaming platform. To discuss the move, I spoke with Tim Nolan of Macquarie Thursday.
There's plenty of competition, and we highlight that pretty thoroughly, I think, in our note. The stock had come down from 175 or so to about 100, so that was kind of an opportune moment for us. But essentially, it's partly the international expansion that we talk about in our report. We think Roku going from almost zero to some large number internationally, and we think they can get to approximately their size internationally that they are in the U.S. now within about 3 years. On top of that, connected TV advertising, which I think is really the growth story here for Roku, is absolutely growing very, very strongly, and Roku has built itself a great position to continue growing into that.
So let me parse down a few of the points that you hit on, one of which was the stock falling from a 170 to 99 in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks, as you mentioned. How much of this was purely from a multiple standpoint? It looked relatively cheap.
Well, at 170 or whatever, you could certainly argue it got quite expensive. You had a number of software-related type of stocks trade down. A number of its kind of broad peers traded down quite heavily as well. So I think it was as much sector rotation going on at the time as anything. But look, the stock went from, 55, I think, was its more recent low, up to 170 within the space of, 3, 4, 5 months. I mean, that's just such a sharp move. I think anytime you get that quick a move, it's just not surprising to have it come back and take a breath. It came down quite sharply. There is some increased news of competition. We heard about Amazon Fire TV. We heard about Comcast with a Flex product, which I don't really think is a competitive issue for it. But more competition coming at the time. It's just kind of the wrong combination of factors for the stock.
You mentioned earlier about international expansion being key, sort of as a catalyst for the stock going forward. What types of numbers on that international side do you need to see from the company to maintain your thesis?
Well, the thing is, we don't really know anything about the international expansion, and we don't know anything about the strategy. We know one or two bits and pieces about markets and devices, but we don't know the rollout schedule. What we've done in our report is tried to lay out what we think is a reasonable assumption based on connected TV penetration rates into homes where Roku can get. So that's where we get to our estimate of them getting into about 35 or so million households internationally within 3 years' time. So that's on the device side. Another way to look at it is on the advertising side. And again, this is really the more important story for them, is the advertising platform. And if you look at connected TV advertising growth, I mean, it's growing double the rate or triple the rate now from a year ago. If you even put a more modest assumption of growth onto that and layer that over a few years' time, you get to pretty similar numbers that we come to for Roku's growth in terms of revenues over the next 3 years.
That was Tim Nolan of Macquarie. Now, when it comes to streaming content, Randy Zuckerberg, the sister of Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, is no stranger to the media landscape. She is the founder and CEO at Zuckerberg Media. She sat down with Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua Thursday. The two discussed the evolution of content, the need for consolidation, and the evolving role for females in the industry.
100 million hours of video gets uploaded just to YouTube, and that's one channel in one day. Every day there's over 1 billion posts on Facebook. So you're right. If who is out there listening to your content if everyone else is just constantly making their own content?
So is it going to go down? Is it going to be oversaturated? I don't, in 5-10 years, what kind of content are we going to be looking at?
I think there's almost going to be a layer of kind of curation, like in museums. I think with so much content over there, there's going to be, it's just exhaustion. And so people are now looking for experts to tell them what to watch. I think the pendulum's almost shifting back again to the bigger need for expert voices in news, in different areas, because people are now bombarded by so much that they kind of want to be guided a little, like you would curate a collection at a museum. But I also think that people are they want more high quality content again. So it's interesting because when I was first starting in social media, it was all about how many eyeballs you could get on things, and now I think the metrics are really shifting back to kind of engagement and depth.
But are the next 3 years going to be critical on who survives and who gets it and who doesn't?
Absolutely. It's going to be very critical, and companies are going to have to make sure that they're playing in all of the new spaces. That's why we're talking about audio so much at Zuckerberg Media, because I think that is one of the only spaces at the moment where there are more people listening to podcasts than there are podcasts that are regularly updated. There was a brief window around blogging like this about 20 years ago. That window is gone. I would not suggest to anyone today to launch a new blog. The world doesn't need it. It's impossible to get noticed. But podcasting and audio is still in that really beautiful window right now. And so I think the media companies that are nimble enough to see those opportunities and get in will survive.
As we look at the 2020 presidential election in the States, how should media companies look at this election differently?
It's interesting because it's so fragmented. I mean, you see there's so many candidates, there's so many people that are thinking, that have passions around different issues and different topics. I think, it's gone are the days when you had a few sources that were the go-to places to turn for an election. So I think media companies, they have to almost think of themselves as 20 or 30 tiny little media companies, or arm their employees to be individual media companies in order to be reaching the most people that they can. But it's an excitingly creative and stressful time to be working inside a media company, for sure.
That was Zuckerberg Media founder and CEO Randy Zuckerberg with Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua. And coming up, the food delivery business is consolidating. Takeaways deal with Delivery Hero among the latest deals in Europe. We'll hear more about the sector and growth projections from the CEO of Delivery Hero next. This is Bloomberg. Food delivery remains a tough market. Frontrunners Uber Eats and the UK's Deliveroo remain unprofitable, and we continue to see consolidation with established giants Takeaway.com and Just Eat preparing to merge. Delivery Hero is a key European player. They sold their German business to Takeaway.com earlier this year and are now seeing customer growth in new markets across Asia and the Americas. Bloomberg talked exclusively with the CEO of Delivery Hero on Thursday to discuss this competitive space.
We are winning market shares in every region against every competitor globally. We are on path to be the largest food platform by the end of the year. And if you take the example of Germany, at the time we did less than 500,000 orders in a country like Taiwan. Now, 8 months later, we do 7.2 million orders per month in Taiwan. That's 3 times the many orders we did in Germany back then. So we see that the investments that we have been doing with the proceeds of that transaction are really paying off.
So you see more of a future in emerging markets. I mean, you've got out of a couple of developed markets, recently. You mentioned Germany, and there have been others. Will you be selling more developed market businesses to focus in on the emerging market space?
So we're generally focused on markets where we see the best return, where we see the highest frequency of customers, where we see the best return on every single incremental order. And that's we have in Middle East and Asia and Latin America. But also in some European markets, some Eastern European markets, we see very good returns. So right now I think we have a very good footprint where we have no general interest of selling in the markets, but rather doubling down in those that we are active in.
Okay, so doubling down on the markets you're active in, and what you're trying to do in some of those markets is deliver more stuff. So not just the food, but to be a little bit more, dare I say it, like an Amazon. Are you not concerned that the margins in that kind of deliver everything business are a little bit on the low side?
So our main focus is to deliver what customers really want and then work back for us from there, finding ways to actually making it happen. And that's why we look at groceries, pharmaceuticals, we look at payments. And if you take an example of this will be Turkey, and we start delivering from our own warehouses where we can deliver in 13 minutes. That's way beyond what Amazon can do. And we now work from there to actually improve the economics. We have reached a point where we can actually deliver things on good economics. And we see that particularly in this quarter, how overall our business now, logistics efficiencies are improving profitability per order. And that's very encouraging.
As you look into the future then, Nicholas, what percentage of your business do you see being in food delivery and what in other logistics provision?
So I still think that food and hot food is our main vertical, and that's where we have our core. And I do believe that is still probably 90% of our business. But from time to time, you need something, and we want to be there for our customers. We want to be that platform.
Why be in something else, though, if it's just 10% of the business?
We still want to make sure that our best customers can go and stay on our platform when they need something. And also having them to continuously come back to our platform gives value. And of course, if you at that time can deliver your toothpaste that evening, then you really need it, you will build a strong love for our brand. But then on the other 9 occasions, you might order food and get that delivered. But you will remember that experience.
That was part of our conversation with the CEO of Delivery Hero. Google is ramping up its restaurant industry footprint. Just last week, the tech giant announced it would be partnering with Olo. That's the leading digital food ordering platform for the restaurant industry. This will enable customers to order directly from over 300 restaurant brands across Google Search, Maps, and the Google Assistant. I sat down for an exclusive interview with Olo CEO Noah Glass Monday.
So the relationship is really about enabling our restaurant brands to be found by consumers when they're searching for restaurants on Google. Consumers kind of naturally do that today. They're looking for their favorite restaurants. Now they'll be able to find those restaurants, order directly from the Google platform, whether that's Search or Maps or even the Google Assistant, and then send that order directly through our platform into the restaurant's point of sale. I can't speak to the way that Google's financial model works. Our financial model is to be a subscription platform with transaction fees on top of that platform for increased order volume.
And so do you share profits with Google per click, when I click on the ad, when I click on your site, or when the delivery is confirmed?
So it's really coming from the context of consumers today ordering through different platforms like third-party restaurant delivery marketplaces. When they order through those platforms, they pay something, the restaurants, pay something between a 20 and 30% commission to those third-party marketplaces. This gives restaurants the ability to take orders directly from Google. Then we're just charging the restaurant a flat fee per month and a fee per transaction that pales in comparison to the third-party restaurant delivery marketplaces.
So talk to me about the restaurant side. Why would they want to be on your site?
Yeah, so restaurants are using Olo as their digital ordering and delivery enablement platform. We work with over 300 brands, over 70,000 restaurants across the United States and in Canada. And restaurants are looking to Olo really as their partner to help drive direct traffic into their restaurants. This is around developing a direct digital relationship with those consumers, and then also listing their menus on popular third-party platforms in a way that keeps the restaurant in control and enables all the orders to originate from outside of the restaurant and come directly into the point-of-sale system at the restaurant.
And are restaurants in Olo playing the volume game here?
Yeah, I mean, this is an amazingly seismic shift that's happening in the restaurant industry. We're going to a place where over half of the overall sales in an $800 billion industry are taking place through consumers that are looking to get their food and consume it off premise. And we're moving towards over half of that coming through digital channels. So the restaurant industry has never seen a shift like that, and we're all about helping our restaurants to be the great beneficiaries of that shift and get their orders coming directly from their customers and building that direct consumer relationship.
And I hear you on this seismic shift, but it's also an industry that's becoming increasingly competitive. Delivery.com, Uber Eats, Grub, Fresh Direct, you name it, all of these are sort of these online delivery programs. How do you stand out?
Yeah, so we are not a consumer-facing brand. We are a software platform that restaurant brands use to build their own apps and websites. So a lot of those companies you mentioned that are consumer brands are partnering with Olo and sending orders through Olo and into the restaurants using our Rails API that enables us to syndicate the menu content out to those third-party sites and then have those orders still come through and go into the restaurant point of sale, keeping things simple at the restaurant. So we're really the partner that restaurants select as their digital ordering platform that they're building on top of, and then enabling them to keep things simple and kind of tapping into all of those other third-party sources of orders.
It's also competitive space when we look from Google's perspective. There's a lot of other mapping services, there's a lot of other search engines, there's a lot of other voice assistant programs. Why did you go with Google?
Well, there's nothing about our relationship with Google that's exclusive. This is part of our Rails platform, which is really about getting our restaurants' menus into every third-party site that they would want their menus to be listed on, where they'd want consumers to be able to find them and place orders. So we've done a similar deal with DoorDash and Postmates and Caviar and Waiter, most recently Uber Eats, and then now this announcement with Google, enabling our restaurants to really go where the consumer is and tap into that on-demand universe of customers.
That does it for this edition of The Best of Bloomberg Technology. We bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. Tune in each day at 5 p.m. New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.